Welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Kip Knight on the show, who has had decades of experience both in marketing, venture capital, and even has authored a couple books. Kip, welcome to the show. Would love to get an intro from you for the audience and before we dive in.
Thanks, Brian. Pleasure to be here. We met recently. We've got the VC category in common, but delighted to share some thoughts on marketing and global marketing and generative AI and anything else you might want to cover.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. That's what I realized when we met recently. I was like, I should just have you on the podcast. There's so much cool things that you've worked on in your career and you're currently working on, and we'll probably work on. So let's just talk about it on the podcast. So tell us about your kind of your journey into marketing and kind of the early days for Kip.
Well, it's funny. I originally thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and I went to LSU as an undergrad. Signed up as chairman of a speakers committee, and I'll make the real short version of the story. Brought in Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek.
No way.
And
as a speaker.
As a speaker.
I'm a huge Trekkie. Anybody listens to the show.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, I got to meet him, and
I have the Enterprise like right here.
You're right. Yeah. Beat me up. Okay. So I got to meet, and he was a wonderful man. And his wife was actually also on the show. She was the head nurse that also came along for the ride. But that was almost a religious experience because we had a sellout crowd and people were buzzing about it for weeks afterwards. And then I just stepped back and thought, you know what? Compared to doing boring legal stuff, marketing seems like the way to go. So from there, went to marketing research, got started in Procter Gamble and brand management, then shifted over, wanted to work global marketing. So worked for the next 12 years with PepsiCo, worked around the world with KFC, ended up as head of marketing for KFC International.
Oh, wow.
Came back to the States, headed up global KFC. And then got an invitation to come out to California and head up Taco Bell. I was CMO at Taco Bell during the days of the Chihuahua. You probably remember the Chihuahua.
Oh, yeah.
Yokiero Taco Bell.
That was your department.
That was my department.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then it was around 2002 and the internet was really starting to heat up. So I had the opportunity to go work at eBay when Meg Whitman was there. And I spent about 6 years with eBay and again, worked international, headed up international marketing there. Then, frankly, I made enough money at that point. I decided to go off on my own for about 4 years and started Night Vision Marketing, which was based in Silicon Valley and helped a lot of startups on their marketing challenges. And then my former boss, Bill Cobb, who I'd worked with at PepsiCo and eBay, just like Godfather 2, he sucked me back into the corporate world and got me
just when you think you're out.
Just when you think you're out, got me over to H&R Block, where I ended up being the president there. I mean, starting out on my marketing journey, would have never guessed I'd been president of a tax company, but I was.
Oh,
wow. Also ran a lot of the international businesses for them. But then 5 years ago, finally said, okay, enough already, and came back to Silicon Valley and have been working with Thomvest ever since, Thomvest Ventures. And that's pretty much, in a nutshell, the journey so far. Oh, and one last thing. 5 years ago, I decided that it'd be a lot of fun if I could share some of the marketing learnings along the way in terms of coaching executives. So we created CMO Coaches, which to my knowledge is the only network of former CMOs that are coaching current CMOs.
That's amazing. What a great way to give back. And I love how you started your career at Procter Gamble and as a brand manager. That's kind of where product management sort of originated, is my understanding, right? So it's like it was in the marketing department, but it was a PM job before there was a product manager kind of role in Silicon Valley.
I would even expand it and say it was a general manager job, but we used to joke it was all the responsibility and none of the authority. So you got to be
kind of
really
like a PM. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like a PM.
Yeah.
So you became really good at diplomacy, especially if you were a small brand, because you would go to shared resources and say, hey, can you help me out? And they'd go, well, I got 79 other brands to think about. What makes you so special? So you got really good at persuasive selling.
Oh, that's interesting. Like becoming the diplomat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us about some of the learnings along the way. I mean, you've been a CMO at some legendary companies and head of marketing. What, you know, what did you learn over those, decades of amazing work? What are some of the takeaways?
Well, I'd share a couple of them. The first is I think there are some eternal marketing truths that are going to be true no matter what. And sometimes you can let technology lead you to think that that's not the case. But at the end of the day, the mantra at Procter was listen and respond to the voice of the customer. And that's still as true today as it was over 150 years ago when Procter started. I think we've got obviously more sophisticated marketing tools to identify those consumers, to really understand what they're thinking and doing and how they're behaving and feeling. Sometimes even without having to ask them. I mean, there are plenty of ways that you can do that. Now, one of the other things, I'm on the board of a company called Quid that does a lot of natural language processing, looking at a bunch of social media data, trying to figure out where sentiment is going. So thought number one is, what are the eternal truths for your marketing philosophy, and how do you bring those to life? And the second thing I would say is, and again, this goes all the way back to Procter, but make a little, sell a little, learn a lot. And the idea behind that is, especially in marketing, you better be experimenting on a daily basis, and you should put aside a certain percentage of your marketing budget upfront. I'll just make it up 5%, and that ought to be sacred money, because what oftentimes happens is you allocate everything and then you remember, oh yeah, I need to go be testing. And all of a sudden there is no funding for testing. And Brian, I can tell you that of all of the big hits I've had in my career, it's been based on a successful test, which we decided to go big on. Because if you're going to your management, especially the CFO, and you're trying to persuade them, hey, let's go spend $10 million on this, you better have something more than a gut feel.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways that you can test things now, but you've got to keep a pipeline full. And oh, by the way, I'd say 80 to 90% of the things I tested failed, but it was those 10% that worked that made the difference. So, thought number two is, always be testing, always be putting money aside to make sure you do that. And the third lesson we throw out there for marketing leaders today, especially, is I think you've got to be the spokesperson for the marketing function in your company. And what do I mean by that? Unfortunately, unlike any other profession I can think of, everybody thinks they can be a better marketer than the CMO. Nobody goes up to the CFO and says, I'm really not sure I agree with your gap principles you're using, or I've got this new, SaaS platform for the CTO, or, et cetera, et cetera. But boy, everybody's got an opinion on marketing. So you have got to, again, this goes back to diplomacy. You've got to politely draw the lines in the sand and say, this is our territory and this is what we are responsible for. And while we welcome your opinion, we are not going to, cede any authority for you to do the marketing to some other functions, because I've seen that happen in too many companies. I've seen it even to the point where they were like Poland in World War II, and they get divided up and marketing doesn't even exist as a function anymore. And then, 2 or 3 years later, the management will realize, boy, that was stupid. And they try to put it back together, and it's always a mess.
Yeah.
So the third point for all the marketers out there is stand your ground. I mean, be a believer, show the company the vital importance of marketing. Because one thing I try to tell people I'm coaching is you're sitting around the management table, you are going to be, in a lot of cases, the only one fighting for the client or the customer. Everybody else is going to have a different agenda. So if you're not willing to stand up and fight for the marketing function, frankly, you ought to be thinking about doing some other profession, because you have to be the leader at all times and not cede any, authority to anybody else.
Well, it reminds me of there's a couple aphorisms in marketing. 50% of my budget's wasted. I just don't know which half. And phrases like that. And when I got into marketing, I remember this was, probably around 2010, 2011. So things were already getting digitized and measurable.
Mhm.
And I really like being able to run experiments, A/B tests and multivariate tests, and being able to actually test what works and measure what works.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about like how marketing has changed over the years from, okay, we're going to run these print ads and TV ads and whatever, um, to, really measuring what works.
Well, it's obviously come a really long way. I mean, at Procter and Gamble, if you did test market, incredibly expensive, incredibly time consuming. Um, and let's not forget, for the younger people in the audience, there once upon a time, most advertising was on television, and it was primarily done by the big brands and primarily done by the big agencies. And I think I heard a stat the other day that, something like 80% of all the businesses that do any kind of social media advertising now are all considered small business. So I think the biggest change has been, to quote Chairman Mao, let a thousand flowers bloom, as opposed to the big gorillas in the cage, like the PepsiCos and the McDonald's determining what marketing is all about. You have an incredible amount of ongoing experimentation by literally millions of different uh, businesses out there. And a lot of these folks, frankly, they do marketing as a slice of their job because they don't have the luxury of having a full-time marketer there. So I think the biggest change has been the ability for people to do things that even as recently as 5 years ago would be unimaginable. I just finished putting together a presentation for another group I'm working with on, if you're a small business, what can you do to get started as far as your marketing goes? There's some fundamental things you can do that don't really rely upon technology, and that's just strategy. Like who is your audience? What are your key audience insights? What's your behavioral objective? What is the promise you're making? What's the reason to believe? What's the brand persona? What are your main delivery channels? How are you going to evaluate success? If you're not answering those questions up front and committing them to writing and reminding everybody anytime you do anything in marketing, you are failing as a marketer, because the biggest mantra I always preach anybody I'm coaching is it's, strategy before execution. So once you get that foundation right, I think that in looking at all the different ways in which you can generate content now, or, really ramp up influence marketing. I will put nobody paid me to say this, but I've just come across this new company called Connect the Dots.
Yeah, you told me
CDT.
about that one.
Yeah, I told you about this one. Let me just tell your listeners real quick about it, because I think it's pretty incredible.
Pretty cool
And
stuff.
for the individual user, it's free. So what you do is it takes in all of your email accounts, Gmail and your
LinkedIn.
company email, LinkedIn, and your LinkedIn. And from that, man, oh man, can you do a lot of stuff. You can generate, specified list of like CEOs or VCs or marketers that you know. And for each individual, it will give you a relationship score, and it'll also show you every email you've sent that person for the last 2 years.
Very helpful when I'm heading into a meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what's the context of this meeting? I don't have to go to my Gmail and search or LinkedIn and search. It's just like it's right there.
Or even when you go back to LinkedIn, it will give you a score, as to what your relationship is with that person. And so for a warm introduction, or for just brainstorming, who do we know in this category, or who can we go to for funding, I think it's incredibly valuable. So
yeah,
we could spend the rest of this podcast talking about all of the different, Butternut.ai is another one I've come across that literally can create a new website in less than 60 seconds.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So
I need to create a new website. My website kind of sucks right now.
Okay, well, butternut.ai, you can check that one out.
I'll try them out.
Yeah, butternut.ai. So the fun thing and the challenge you think about marketing is literally every day, there is something out there that you should at least take a look at. I think at last count, there was something like over 6,000 marketing platforms and APIs and apps and all that other good stuff. Frankly, I thought at this point, things would start to consolidate a bit. As they do in most categories, but no, this thing is almost like the expanding universe.
It's like every new technology creates 10, maybe dozens of companies to go after that new way of doing things. I mean, I have 2 in my portfolio alone that do that use AI for automated outreach, right?
Yeah.
To say, okay, like here's the company, here's what we know about them, here's what we know about the individual. here's what we know about you and your company and your offerings, and let's just automate that outreach to make
Right.
it as poignant and relevant as possible. So it's just not just random templated email.
And one thing Meg taught me, she had a great phrase. She said, the disruptors become the disrupted. And so what does that mean? It means that you can never sit on your laurels and think, okay, we got this, because no
Right.
matter how cool you think your technology is, you better keep looking over your shoulder and innovating, because there's somebody who at some point is going to reveal a new and better way of doing whatever you're doing, and you better be ready for it. So, there's no timeout on this. It's always, game is always on.
Or you just get really big and just buy the companies
Yeah,
like
or
Microsoft.
buying. Yeah, that's the other thing. Well, that's hopefully what a lot of startups are hoping will happen,
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. Me as an investor, early stage. Yeah. I'd love to
Right.
have a little 50x, 100x outcome on
Sure.
the really, really early stage stuff. Why?
Yeah.
I read a stat, and I don't know if it's any longer true, but CMOs have the shortest tenure of any C-suite exec. Why do you think that? Why do you think that is?
Well, we've studied this. There have been a number of studies that are published, and it's not a uniform agreement that it is as bad as some of the numbers say. Like 18 months is on the low end. I've seen other studies that say, no, actually, it's not that bad. It depends upon, frankly, a lot of stuff, like what type of company you're talking about and what category you're in, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the one big takeaway for your listeners, and this would be true for, I think, any profession, but especially marketing. The number one reason CMOs get fired is a lack of alignment between the CMO and the CEO. And specifically, the mistake that a lot of CMOs make is they speak the language of marketing, whereas they should be speaking the language of finance. And instead of getting hung up on marketing metrics, they should be focused on financial outcomes. In other words, marketing is simply a means to an end. It is not an end in itself. And if you can really work hard at keeping that top of mind anytime you're interacting with the CFO, or the CEO, or the board of directors, you will be infinitely better off than if you go in there like a typical marketer and talk marketing speak. Because
talk about brand lift and other random marketing metrics, rather than saying,
hey,
marketing influence revenue was X last year and now it's Y, and that's a X% growth rate. And
it's the analytics, it's the numbers, it's how things connect to each other. And another mistake that a lot of marketers make is they're going there, I can't wait to show you the new creative. Don't! Typically, you're asking for trouble, because everybody's going to have an opinion on it. And guess what? It's not going to be unanimous. Like, we loved it. A lot of people are going to, start telling you what they should, if they were a marketer, they would do this. And so now you're totally in the ditch. So that's the number one thing to watch out for. And I would even proactively, and this is something I did when I was at Taco Bell. I invited our CFO to go to lunch every Friday, and we would talk about marketing principles, and we talk about financial, accounting principles.
Yeah.
And
each other's language.
Exactly. And so there was this mutual respect and understanding, so that he understood more of what I was doing. And importantly, I could understand what he was concerned about. Again, going all the way back to the diplomacy skills at P&G, if you learn how to think the way they think and speak the way they think, you are going to be a lot more successful in creating a partnership, as opposed to going in there and just hammering people over the head with marketing. One other tip, Brian, I would give a lot of folks that are in marketing: if you ever get the opportunity to work in a non-marketing function, for God's sake, do it. Half my career has been in general management. The other half's been in marketing. Every time I've come back from marketing into general management, I was a much better marketer, because marketers have marketing myopia. And if you go step out of the marketing role for a while and come back into it, you will have a whole different appreciation for what marketing actually is supposed to be doing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as someone who's done pretty much every function in every kind of company, I can really appreciate from a sales perspective, or from a product management perspective, or a BD perspective, or a GM perspective. Yeah. Like how they all interrelate, and they're all important. But tell me about how you kind of transitioned out of, being the exec to coaching the execs, and kind of what that transition was, and eventually how that led to Thomvest.
Well, I'll break that into two different parts. I'll do with the Thomvest first. I don't know about you, but some of the most pivotal moments of my career have been serendipity and right place at the right time. So in Thomvest, I was working at eBay. Good friend of mine, Rob Chestnut, who was head of trust and safety and went on to be head of, legal at Airbnb, and terrific guy. He said, "Hey, I'm on an advisory board. They're looking for some help on the marketing front. Why don't you come with me to this dinner tonight?" And so I show up, and there are like 20 people in the room, and I sit next to my future boss, Don Butler, who by the end of the evening, Don said, "You know what? We could probably use some marketing help. Would you like to meet Peter Thompson, who is our banker?" And Peter just happened to be in town. And that morning I had breakfast, and that was way back in 2008. And here we are in almost 2024, and I'm still working with those two fine gentlemen. So,
wow.
Network, network, network. You can never do enough. Don't say no to a networking opportunity. You never know what might happen to it.
Especially dinners. I don't really like network events where I'm just randomly talking to people at tables.
Right. I agree.
I do like to sit down. Let's just, especially if it's, exec level folks, like a dinner like you described, because now you can sit and actually have a conversation for a couple hours.
Right.
Break bread.
And then as far as the transition from, being a general manager or an executive to coaching, it was hard for me because let me tell you, what a good executive does and what a good coach does are two very different things. The biggest thing I've had to really work hard on, some people do it naturally, I don't, is as an executive, you make declarative statements on a frequent basis. As a coach, you should never make a declarative statement. It should always be, "So Brian, how do you feel about, blah, 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 blah," as opposed to,
"Walk me
"Brian,
through your
here's what you need to do."
decision-making process. Yeah, it's kind of like being a parent in a way. It's
right.
What were you thinking?
No.
You can't even say that. Yeah, that's too heavy-handed.
That's too heavy-handed. It's more like, "Well, in a perfect situation, Brian, what do you think you would have done differently to make this a better outcome?" So I've literally got a whole bookshelf. Man, you see someone behind me on how to ask better questions and lead by questioning. And I've got hundreds of them. So that is a work in progress, but I think I'm getting a bit better at it.
Yeah, that's great. And you've written a couple books to that regard. Learn to Leap in Crafting Persuasion.
Yeah, they're different. Crafting Persuasion, I wrote with two other gentlemen, Ed Tezzi and Bob Pearson, and that is a communication strategy. I'm going to call it a textbook because a number of organizations are using it as such. And if you want to check that one out, not only can you check it out on Amazon, maybe download a sample or audiobook, but you can go to craftingpersuasion.com and get a pretty good sense of what's in it. And then the other one that I finished, I wrote it during COVID because what else are you going to do? It's called Learn to Leap. How leaders turn
video
risk
games. That's what
you
did.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I finished my book. So it's called Learn to Leap, How Leaders Turn Risk into Opportunity. And that is a very different book. It's really more a lot of stories, and they're organized around various values such as courage or empathy or, leadership. And again, that was a fun book to write, but that's the one that I think more people have responded to in terms of a meaningful difference. Because the one thing I say in the beginning of the book is the biggest regret most people have at the end of their life is not what they did, but what they didn't do. And so the whole point of Learn to Leap is, if you've got a choice of taking the safe route or taking, maybe the more challenging, riskier route, and you're exhibit A for this one, Brian, you could have had a much easier path that you're going down, but you didn't.
Keep climbing the ladder at Microsoft and keep collecting checks and totally. Yeah.
And you chose the broken glass and bare feet route. So, that's the way it goes sometimes, but you're learning.
Yeah. I think, I grew up poor and, worked full time through college and got a finance degree because I wanted to really understand how money worked. And, got to Wall Street and I really hated it. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I was teaching high school math in the Bronx. I remember I was in the Teaching Fellows program, getting my master's in education, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I had this epiphany. I was like, oh, okay, what would I do if I had 10 or 20 million in the bank? And I was like, okay, not this. Okay, great. What's the next thing that I might do? And I just kept iterating, and it was really hard. It was really hard. I had to see a therapist at one point because I was really depressed, and I had to see a career counselor after career counselor. I tried, between when I was 25 to 40, I probably had, at least 15, 20 jobs, and maybe underestimating.
Wow.
Oh yeah, easily.
Wow.
All kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
I've done like literally everything, trying lots of things, and product was probably the closest. I did marketing for years, and then product management was probably the closest of like, if I had to collect a salary, you know, it'd either be an exec or a PM, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it wasn't until I started investing in startups that I was like, okay, this is what I do. If I had
Oh, that's great.
100 million in the bank, I
Right.
happened to find it, but I was in my 40s by the time I found
Mm-hmm.
it, right? So some people never find it.
Well, when I worked at KFC, I used to tell the story of Colonel Sanders. I doubt anybody has ever heard this story. It's pretty amazing. So Colonel Sanders had a similar journey. He
Oh, right.
tried
Yeah.
a dozen different jobs, failed at every one of
Failed
them.
at a lot of stuff. Yep.
Every single thing. And he finally opened up a gas station, and it had, a pretty good amount of traffic on it. And he loved to, make food in the kitchen for the family. And he started tinkering around with, making original recipe using pressure cooker. And he would, get this, Brian, he would invite people, get that, you're driving up in your car. Colonel says, you hungry? And they go, yeah, well, why don't you join us for dinner tonight? And he would invite them to come in and have dinner with his family. He charged them whatever. And so he was, very happy doing that. And then the interstate came by 20 miles away, and overnight his business went from, booming to bust.
Wow.
So at the age of 65, he got his beat up Cadillac, pressure cooker, and 11 herbs and spices, and started traveling around the U.S., going into restaurants saying, would you like for me to make you some chicken? Okay, great. They like it, put it on the menu as original recipe, and he charged them a nickel per chicken as his royalty. And that, my friend, is the very first franchising here in the great United States of America. So that is Colonel Sanders. So I have enormous respect for somebody who at the age of 65 went out there and started to, actually make things happen. So it's never too late. Yeah.
It's never too late. Yeah. Keep trying. If it's, and it reminds me of the Steve Jobs quote from his commencement. He said, anytime I looked at myself in the mirror in the morning and I didn't want to do what I was about to do that day, and it happened too many days in a row, I'd make a change. I'd change something. And that like really resonated with me, because it's, life's too short, man, to just wake up day after day and just do something you don't want to do.
Oh, I agree. I just got back from a trip to Korea with my son, which was fantastic. And I was in this one particular shop, and they had this quote up there that I absolutely love. It says, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And what a great philosophy, because the attitude, and it's my philosophy, even if it all goes to crap, and it doesn't work out, I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot more from my failures than any of the successes I've had. And another quote I love from Franklin Roosevelt is, a smooth sea does not make a skilled sailor. So if you're going through a tough time, if you want to get philosophical about it, think about all the great learnings you're going to have at the end of this, even if it's painful at the time, because the best executives I know have never had a career that went up and to the right. They've had setbacks. Some have had spectacular failures.
Yeah.
And yet they've learned from that. They got their act back together again, and they kept trying. And the Japanese have a great expression, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I'd say for anybody who's an entrepreneur or even, a business professional, you got to have that kind of philosophy. And because as a leader, people are going to look at you for the clues on, well, how should I be thinking about all this? Am I going to be despondent and depressed and give up, or am I going to get back in the ring and keep going after it?
Yeah. So let's talk about how all of this experience and this amazing career has informed your Thomvest venture capital experience. And tell us a little bit, the audience, a little bit about Thomvest, how much is under management, how you guys make decisions on what to invest in, and how you support those companies. Because what struck me when we had our initial conversation was how concentrated the portfolio is.
Yeah, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary, and we are about $500 million assets under management. For the first half of our life, around 12 years, we were what I would call a generalist fund. And one day, our managing director, Don Butler, who is, one of the most experienced and successful managing directors I know in this space, looked at it and said, you know what, we've got to start to figure out where we want to focus our efforts and how we are going to take our expertise to evaluate these opportunities, because if you're literally playing Shark Tank and anybody that walks in the door has got a different idea and you're trying to, figure out what's going to go on, you're probably going to have a pretty lousy batting average. On the other hand, if you focus in on, we're right now in about 4 sectors, I could maybe say 5, but we're in fintech, prop tech, cyber, and cloud infrastructure. And by having the people on your team that have deep experience in all of those, there are just multiple advantages. You have the networking effect, so you'll learn about these deals before other people do. You have the ability to evaluate them and look to others in that category to evaluate them. And you're also able to build on your institutional knowledge, because if you've had a couple of wins in fintech, and we've certainly had a number of those, it just makes you that much smarter for the next round.
Right.
So if given a choice between being a generalist fund or a specialized fund, that would be an interesting research project to do. I'd put my money on specialized funds are going to be the generalized funds every time.
Yeah, generally, yeah, I think the research pans that out. You don't want to be just invest in anything that sounds good. You have to somewhat close the aperture, not too much.
Right.
It's why I don't just invest in AI, even though I worked in AI for 10 years, because if I only invested in AI, I'd probably miss some other stuff that is adjacent to it, but not too far away from it, because B2B SaaS is generally what we do.
Right.
I can't imagine just having just an AI fund. I think it's just too nichey.
Well, and in fact, we even debated when I said, are we in a 5th category now? We made a investment recently in Cohere, and we're constantly looking at other similar opportunities. And we even debated, well, do we have an AI sector? But then we thought, that'd be like saying you have an internet sector. It spreads across so many different things. It's going to be woven into everything. So that actually wouldn't make a lot. Well. It wouldn't really make a lot of sense. We don't.
It's like I invest in companies using databases. Great.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Good for you.
Good for you. Yeah. That's such an enabling technology. Congratulations.
Right.
Yeah. Every company's using AI these days, right?
Yeah.
At least at some level.
Right.
So tell us about the operating partner role at Thomvest, and what does that look like, and how do you guys help companies?
Well, we actually divide and conquer. We've got venture partners that specialize in the sectors that I just talked about, in terms of fintech or prop tech or cloud infrastructure or cybersecurity. And their mission is to go out and constantly be evaluating new investment opportunities, as well as making sure the current investments that we have are well tended to. As you know, Brian, it's kind of like a marriage. It's there's a lot that happens after the wedding ceremony. You've got to continue to, make sure that everything's okay. If they need more money, you need to make sure you have that available for them. And then in my role as operating partner, I primarily focus on marketing, since that's my sweet spot. So I work with a terrific agency, BAM PR, and we've been with them for about 5 years. So our goal is, I think at last count, there was something like over 600 VC firms on the West Coast. That's a lot. So, we do what we can to make sure that people are aware of our name and what we stand for and what we are investing in, so that it makes it that much easier when we're doing introductions.
Yeah.
I've also got a board seat with Quid, as I mentioned, because I've got some experience in terms of marketing research and marketing data and marketing analytics. So I've been on that board now for 12 years.
Oh, wow.
And the other thing that I try to do as operating partner is, since I'm not, deep into a particular sector, I can be semi-objective and ask maybe what could be considered dumb questions, but sometimes dumb questions are good questions, because people go, "Oh wow, I never thought about it that way."
Yeah, such a beginner's mind kind of question.
Yeah. Like we were looking at one the other day involving the franchising area, in terms of fintech and financing franchisees. Now, I know a lot about franchising given my marketing background, but I don't know a lot about financing franchising. But by putting my head together with our expert in fintech in that space, we were able to go through and evaluate the opportunity and decide, is this something we wanted to go into or not? So I'm a little bit of a utility fielder in terms of, on occasion will go in there and help evaluate something from a different perspective rather than the expert perspective.
Tell us about, you've seen early stage, late stage, huge Fortune 500 companies. You've seen all stages of startups and corporations. When is the right time to hire a CMO? What are some of the challenges that startups face versus kind of later stage startups around marketing?
That's a great question. And that's something I've actually done a bit of research on. And I'm sure you've heard of fractional executives. And that is, frankly, something that up until a couple of years ago, I was extremely skeptical about, because I thought, well, how can you be working on marketing in multiple companies at the same time? There's so many things that, could go wrong with that, including skepticism that you're not going to be around when it hits the fan. So why should they even believe that you can do what you need to do? I've really changed my mind on that for a couple of reasons. First of all, in a practical sense, for a CMO fully loaded, it's going to be $300,000 to $500,000 to hit a P&L on startup. For most startups, that's a non-starter. And yet, on the other hand,
exec, it's going to be, you're talking about the total comp is going to be 300 to 500. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. By the time you load in, salary and bonus and
benefits,
incentives
and
oh, by the way, since they turn over so much, severance and recruiting fees for the one that takes their place. I mean, it's going to be a lot of money.
Yep.
And yet, if you think about it, I would argue that the most critical time for a startup to have a great marketing person is in the very beginning. Because to my point earlier, if you don't have the right strategy, it doesn't matter how good your execution is, you're dead. So,
and I see this with a lot of startups, actually. They put the growth before the strategy.
Yeah.
And they don't really know, what segment they're going after, what the message is,
right.
Where the message is resonating, what the pricing model is. They're not getting the strategy right. They're just sort of kind of grasping at straws.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me give you a live example. I don't think he'd mind me using him as an example. So I've known Brad Simmons for 20 years. I knew him when he worked at Experian, and I had my consulting company. And he went on to be the head of marketing at Figure and at Blend. And I think maybe about 5 years ago, he decided, you know what? I want to mix it up. I want to go ahead and see if I can do multiple clients at the same time. And he loves it. And he's my go-to reference for a lot of fractional executives now, because he will go in there and it's kind of like using the product manager sprint philosophy. He'll go in there and do a 3-month sprint, and they'll agree, okay, in 90 days, we're going to focus on a strategy and what your year one marketing plan is going to be and what's that going to cost and your dashboard. And at the end of 90 days, they go, okay, fine. Check, 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 check. Do you want another 90-day sprint? Okay, fine. Now we're going to move on into the next phase. So
I like that.
For some of the startups that are listening, and to frankly, the existing marketing leadership that's out there, I've become a bit of a proponent on fractional executives for startups, especially in marketing, because think about it. If you could get somebody that's got 20 or 30 years experience in your category, and you can hire them for, instead of $500,000, the all-in cost might be 150. Who would not take that?
Yeah,
deal,
10K a month, 12K a month kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's typical of the fractional rate that I find for 5 to 10 hours a week. It's like 10K, something like that.
And it's a lot. And if it doesn't work out, it's a quickie divorce, because you go, hey, Brian,
let's commit to each other for 90 days, see how it goes.
Yeah.
And then
we're not going to do another sprint. Yeah. Or if you love them, you entice them to go full time and sign up as a full time executive now. So it's got a lot of advantages to it. It really does. And Chief Outsiders is a group that I've gotten familiar with. They're a terrific resource if you're interested in learning more about how that might work for you.
Chief Outsiders. Okay. Yeah, we'll check that out. Let's switch to rapid fire. Can you name one marketing strategy that works surprisingly well in an unexpected market? You've managed marketing internationally across, countless countries. What's some funny or interesting marketing strategies that worked?
Well, I can tell you about some that worked and some that didn't work, because I introduced KFC. You can either love me or hate me for it, but I probably launched KFC in a dozen countries around the world in a general management role. And the marketing strategies that work well on that were the fundamental basics in terms of sampling the product, having store openings, having celebrities, having a lot of fun and excitement and all that. What didn't work is we tried a similar tactic with Taco Bell, and they're doing much better now. But, when I was working, with the folks back 20 years ago, you go to these markets and they would look at a taco and literally go, what is this? And how do I eat it? So it didn't really matter how creative or clever your marketing was. You had a fundamental product problem.
Oh, that was the head soap commercials. I remember that.
Yeah. And I think Shaq got in a little bit of trouble on that one, but we kind of make fun of that in the US because we know what a taco is and we know how to eat it. But imagine if you went into a market that had never seen a taco and you go, here, eat this. Most people would not have a clue as to what to do. So I guess the lesson on that one is you got to make sure the timing is right for your product. You don't want to be too late, but on the other hand, you certainly don't want to be too early because all the marketing in the world is not going to fix that for you.
Yeah. Love that. So tell me about a pivotal moment in your career. What was that critical turning point that set you on the path you're on?
Well, I would have to go back to the Gene Roddenberry example I started out in the very beginning, where I was convinced I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I gave a really strong thought about, well, maybe not, maybe marketing is the way to go. I'd say another critical one was I had been at Procter for 10 years and really enjoyed it and was doing quite well, was getting promoted and, making decent money and all that. But I really, really, really wanted to work international. There was just something inside of me that said, I have to go out and try to do this in other parts of the world. And it's so funny because, and this would be all the way back in 1990, their philosophy was, well, we've had a couple of Americans go abroad, and when they came back, they didn't seem very happy. So we're not going to do that anymore. And it's like, well, gee, it breaks my heart, but I'm out of here. And that was a really courageous decision on my part because, I was going to PepsiCo, which had a reputation of, eating Procter Gamble people for lunch.
Yeah.
I mean, they just chew them up and spit them out. But, it lasted 12 years. And so it worked out fine. And so just like I say in Learn to Leap, your biggest regrets at the end of your life are going to be not what you did, but what you wish you would have done. I could have taken the safe route and stayed at Procter Gamble the rest of my career and been perfectly happy. But I've worked in over 60 countries now, and I've worked in 7 different categories. None of that would have happened if I hadn't been willing to go out there and give it a go. So, take the leap.
Yeah.
And you'll be fine no matter what.
Love that. So what's, looking back, what's one thing you wish you did?
So you probably got a hint of this. I have toyed around with the idea of, boy, wouldn't it be fun to work in the entertainment business? I've actually had Warner Brothers as a client. I've known people that have been in that space and all that. But the one thing I learned is, whereas Procter & Gamble and PepsiCo and eBay were fairly disciplined marketing organizations, with all due respect to my entertainment brethren, that one almost seems like, talk about random luck. And talk about, one day you're hot and one day you're not. So even though it might be a fun fantasy, I guess a lot of people want to be in sports marketing, and that's never been my fantasy. So I kind of fantasize what it would be like if you got if you were promoting a hit movie or a hit album or a hit TV series and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that just like a lot of other things, what you think about it looks like on the outside is totally different once you're inside. So that's been my one fantasy that I didn't fulfill, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's not too late. Never too late. You could be like Colonel Sanders of the movie industry.
Well, that's true. I'm okay. I'm on it.
Just get out there. Start inviting people into your house to watch your movies.
Absolutely.
That's funny. I mean, this is obvious, but like kind of looking forward in the next, 5 to 10 years in tech and marketing and startups, like, what do you think that looks like? With obviously you have large language models and all the AI stuff, but how do you think it changes fundamentally how business is done?
I think the answer is we don't know yet, but we're going to find out. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this guy, he equated generative AI to elevator music. In other words, it's in the background. It's going to be fulfilling a certain function, but it's never going to really step up and play the role that true creativity does with humans. I think he's probably right. But on the other hand, I still think there is an enormous amount of predictable processes which generative AI can fulfill a meaningful role in.
Yeah.
And if you think about, like the sales funnel or the marketing funnel, and how can we identify and communicate and qualify and sign up and retain, various clients. Off the top of my head, there are 100 different ways that generative AI could be very beneficial to that. But just like the internet, I think there are going to be a lot of hype. There's going to be a lot of disappointment. There's going to be a lot of retrenching. But unlike crypto, which, I have zero respect. Crypto is, to me, the biggest Ponzi game of the world. But unlike crypto, where I think there's a nothing burger, I think with generative AI, in fact, I heard a great quote the other day. AI is not going to take over marketing, but marketers that know how to use generative AI are going to have all those that don't know how to use it. So just like I said earlier, it's all about always be learning, always be testing, always be experimenting. Some stuff's going to work, some stuff's not going to work, but, try it. Get out there and, give it a go. And like that expression from Korea said, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. But you do not have the luxury of just saying, no, we're good. We're status quo all the way. And, we're not going to worry about it, because to Meg's philosophy, the disruptor become the disrupted. And you do not have the luxury of taking that kind of philosophy. And besides that, I still think marketing is the most energetic, fun, passionate, exciting profession out there. So why wouldn't you want to go ahead and continue to do that every single day you're a marketer?
Yeah.
That's where the fun is. That's where the creativity and the energy comes from. Because once you figure out how to do it, not only is there financial success, but I think, frankly, more importantly, there's a certain internal satisfaction you get of figuring that out. And it wasn't easy, but you figured it out, and now things are better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're describing there is spot on. I think it's not, it's just like, when Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov in the 90s.
Right.
It didn't end chess. It just transformed it into something else, where the human computer interaction, the combined unitar of the chess player, combined with AI, can beat any human or AI player individually.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like our tools. We shape our tools, and our tools shape us, but we become stronger and more leveraged with our tools.
Exactly.
So we can do more than we could before.
Yep. And we've actually been using types of generative AI, and this for like the last decade. They had a better marketing campaign this last year.
Yeah, I remember seeing the first. I was building a sales chatbot 6-7 years ago.
Right.
And our data scientists like, here, let me show you something. And it was basically generative AI that could read a knowledge document and answer questions about it. And I was like, that is crazy technology. But we couldn't get it to work properly all the time. So it was super early.
Right.
It's probably GPT-1 or, right after the Transformer paper came out. But
what an exciting time to be in marketing. I wouldn't trade places with anybody right now in terms of what a great time to be a marketer, what a great time to experiment and learn and share learnings and have some fun while you're doing it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I know we're right about time, Kip. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. This was a really fun conversation.
Well, Brian, I've enjoyed it.
Thanks so much.